of the Congress Party, a party, as most of you know, has ruled India since 1947, with the exception of 1977 to 80, 1989 to 91, 1998 to 2004, and since 2014, it's not been in power in Delhi. Rahul Gandhi was educated in 3 countries: in India at St. Columbus, Doon School, and St. Stephen's; in the United States at Harvard and Rollins College; and in the UK at Cambridge University. He took his MPhil in Development Studies from Trinity College of Cambridge. Our event will have 3 segments. The first segment will be my conversation with him for half an hour. Each segment will have half an hour. The second segment will feature a faculty panel from Brown for half an hour, and 4 of our colleagues from different departments will join the conversation. And the last 30-minute segment is for our students. There is a student panel, again, from different disciplines, which will be posing questions to Rahul Gandhi. This is an international event. We are in the Zoom and YouTube universe. Some of our panelists are joining us from elsewhere, not from Boston or Providence, the 2 towns where the faculty lives, Brown faculty lives. Most of it, of course, in Providence, but some of us live in Boston. I live in Boston. I'm joining you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Prerna Singh, my political science colleague, will be joining us from Stanford, California. She is spending a semester there on a fellowship. Leela Gandhi, my colleague in the English department, will be joining us from London, UK, and she is actually teaching this semester, teaching her Brown class from London. That's possible in the Zoom universe. And 2 of our student panelists will be joining us from India, one from Shimla and one from Delhi. So let's start. Welcome, Rahul Gandhi.
Thank you.
Brown.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to host you, and hope there will be an opportunity to host you in person as well in future. Let me start with a remark that caught my eye. You made 2 weeks back at Cornell. You argued that politics in India, especially electoral politics or politics in general, is no longer a fight for power. Politics in India have become a fight for India, not just a fight for power. Now, we noted in November, during the last presidential election in the United States, that Joe Biden, now President of the United States, made a claim which had roughly similar properties, and you'll tell us whether your claim is different. He argued that the election of 2020 was not about a change in power in Washington. It was about the soul of America. Is your claim, Rahul, and may I call you Rahul during this conversation, is your claim similar to Biden's claim or substantially different?
Well, to me, India is many different diverse viewpoints, many different languages, different cultures, different histories, different ideas. And modern India, to me, is essentially an ongoing negotiation between those ideas, those cultures. And what Gandhiji did, what our founding fathers did, is they created the architecture for that negotiation. Centerpiece of that architecture, of course, is one man, one vote and the constitution. And then from that idea of one man, one vote and the constitution arose many independent institutions which guarantee the negotiation. It's very obvious to me that those institutions are what allow the negotiation between our identities, between our languages, between our cultures, between our states to occur. What I see is a determined attack on those institutions and a capture of those institutions. There are elements of that taking place in the United States. But of course, I'm nobody to comment on the United States. I don't understand the United States as well as my American friends there would. But I get the sense that the American institutions are showing much more resilience than the Indian ones. I get the sense that the American system is actually countering this onslaught better than our system. To me, if the negotiation between these states breaks down, then the idea of India breaks down. Before 2014, there was an assault on institutions by the RSS, by similar forces, concentration of capital, you can say, but it was subversive. It was being silently done. It was done in Madhya Pradesh. It was done in states that they ran. It was done through the Shishu Mandirs, through their schools. It was done by siphoning off public funds into their schools. But it wasn't out in the open. What's happened is in 2014, it is out in the open, it's legitimized, and it's across the board. And to me, that's why it's an attack on India. See, I represent a part of that negotiation, as do all other political players. As you know, we represent 20% of, the Congress party represents 20% of our population. Other opposition parties together represent a much bigger chunk than the Prime Minister and the BJP. But we're not given that room for negotiation. We're not given that room for conversation. That's what's changed. And as a politician, I require institutional support. I simply cannot operate without it. It's a fantasy if somebody thinks that I can operate or a democracy can operate without independent institutions. That we don't have anymore. That's why I classify it as an assault on India.
Are you in particular referring to the judiciary or some other independent institutions?
I'm referring to every single institution. There's not a single institution that is not under this type of assault. I mean, to give you some nuance, my mic is switched off in Parliament. In the middle of, while I'm giving a speech, it's switched off. Right? So the essence of Parliament is that I'm allowed to speak. Right? The essence of Parliament is that when I'm speaking, the country can see what I'm saying. That the TV is showing what is going on in Parliament. The TV doesn't show what's going on in Parliament. Right?
So variety of institutions.
No, I'll elaborate. So
yeah.
The conversation within Parliament, BJP MPs cannot have an open discussion in Parliament. They tell me that. They're like, हमें तो बस बता दिया जाता है क्या बोलना है. It's a straightforward top-down thing. They cannot go. One BJP MP went in a meeting with the Prime Minister and raised his hand and said, I don't agree with you, and they threw him out. It's the same with the judiciary. It's the same with the press. So it's a constant onslaught. And that's where the problem is.
And the idea of India that you are speaking about is essentially built on diversity and expression of that diversity, right?
Yes, it is built on diversity and expression of that diversity, but more importantly, it is a negotiation between those ideas. It is an active, dynamic, constant negotiation. And that negotiation requires structures for that negotiation to take place.
Okay, so you're defining
when the British was leaving India, The question was transfer of power to whom? That was the challenge. Who do you transfer power to? And it was the Congress party that created the environment for the transfer of power. The British were asking a legitimate question in the 20s. They were saying, okay, to whom do we transfer power? Not to the Maharajas, obviously, because the Maharajas were not India. The Maharajas were a divided India which was at war with itself. So the answer to that question came from Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress party. They said, okay, yes, to whom? To the people of India. How? Through the vote. How? Through parliament. How? Through the constitution. And then further development, how? Through these institutions that will protect the voice of the people of India. So it's not just a question of diversity. It's a question of active negotiation taking place between that diversity.
Okay. As a lot of people have noted, this has been an international commentary on this matter. Two of the leading agencies, non-governmental agencies in the world that rate or assess democratic health in the world, the Freedom House and the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Sweden, which has risen to prominence of late, both have downgraded Indian democracy. Freedom House calls India now partly free, not unfree, partly free. And that is after 30 odd years that India has been downgraded. The VDEM Institute in Sweden uses a stronger term. India has the largest democracy, and I'm citing now, the largest democracy in the world has become an electoral autocracy. Electoral autocracy is the term it has used. Not yet a full autocracy, but electoral autocracy. Now, I have two questions. One, do you agree with this assessment, the assessment of Freedom House? They're roughly in the same direction. They're slightly different, but roughly they're both talking about a steep decline, a steep democratic decline in India. Do you agree with that assessment? And second, VDEM Institute, following political science and its own research, has also said something which people have not noted yet, and on which I think we should seek your comment. It says that when polities, democratic polities, start attacking civil liberties, and then civil society institutions, and then independent institutions, then the next step normally, there is no law about this, there is a tendency they're talking about. The next step after an attack on civil liberties, an attack on civil society, an attack on independent institutions, next step is typically an attack on the integrity of elections itself. So the second question after the first question, which is about, do you agree with these two agencies? The second question is, are you concerned that the integrity of elections might also be attacked before long?
Look, I mean, these institutions, of course, have their view. They are foreign institutions. And frankly, we don't need a stamp from them. But directionally, what they're saying is correct. I would add one thing. I would say they're much behind the curve. I think the situation is actually much worse than they imagine, first. Second, again, you cannot separate electoral democracy from institutional frameworks, right? An election is not simply people going and pressing a button on a voting machine. An election is about narrative. An election is about institutions that make sure that the framework in the country is operating properly. Election is about a judiciary that is being fair. Election is about a debate that is taking place in parliament, right? So you need those things for the vote to count. You know, Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi used to have elections. They used to win them. They were actually voting. It wasn't that they weren't voting, but there was no institutional framework to protect that vote. So to me, India is going to find out that it's actually much further down the curve than it thinks and that outsiders think.
I see. So, if anything, you're saying Freedom House and WeDem Institute are behind the curve. The situation is much worse.
Yeah, and I'm saying the sequence that you first attack this, then you attack the vote. I'm saying you don't need to attack the vote. With modern technology, if you control WhatsApp and you control Facebook, you don't need to attack the vote. Why would you do something like that? Leave it alone. You control the narrative anyway. The head of Facebook in India everybody knows is a BJP person.
I see.
One girl recently left the Congress party, went to Facebook, right? They found out she's Congress. She had a job contract. Sorry, you can't come. She's crying at my door. So you don't need to do that. I mean, they might do that. They might actually say dispense with this thing, but you can destroy an electoral democracy in the 21st century if you've got Facebook, if you've got WhatsApp, if you've got financial dominance, and if you control the institutions. Why wouldn't you let people just go and vote? Why wouldn't you just keep that pretense? No problem. Why does it harm you? It legitimizes you.
Okay, so the elections can become simply a legitimating device rather than a method of selecting governments. That we can.
Which is what I mean. We've seen it in the 20th century, right? We've seen these guys coming to power just with this legitimization of the vote. I mean, there's no reason Saddam Hussein needed the vote, but it was like, okay, let's do it. Let's just do it. Why not?
Yeah. My third question is,
sorry, it's by the way, if you look at the strategy employed by the Muslim Brotherhood, right, and the strategy employed by the RSS, it's implicit in what they're doing. It's in there, right? They're basically saying capture power through the electoral process, capture the institutions, and then the electoral process is irrelevant.
Okay. My third question is about foreign policy and international relations. Everyone has noted, and rightly so, that China is now a new global superpower. Certainly in the United States, but in much of the Western world, the notion that there is a serious rivalry emerging between the United States on the one hand as the leading superpower and China as the emerging superpower, that rivalry is seriously underway now. What are the implications of China's rise to a global superpower status? What are its implications for India, according to you?
I mean, again, China's rise has been taking place for some time now. And for example, the success the Chinese have had in manufacturing is causing some of our political tremors, right? The Trump supporters, a lot of the Trump supporters and a lot of the supporters of the BJP, they are Trump supporters and BJP supporters because of large-scale joblessness. That's why then the failure of manufacturing, so to speak. So China's rise has been affecting our politics for some time now. And it affects it in multiple ways. For example, if you go into the details of Karnataka politics was blown apart because of iron ore exports to China, right? So it affects it at the state level, it affects it at the national level. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is the Chinese clearly have a strategy. It's very clear. And the strategy is take the planet back to a terrestrial vision. And it's a economic strategy. It has a military strategy, but it isn't essentially an economic strategy. What they're presenting to people who are looking at the Belt and Road is prosperity, right? And they're putting a lot of money behind that prosperity. In a sense, they're doing what the United States did post-World War, giving a lot of money to Italy, to Germany, to France, to these countries, and saying, look, we will help you rise. There is no counter strategy to that. So we work with Americans. We have a partnership with Americans. We are two democracies. We have a lot in common, but there is no clear strategy of prosperity between the United States and her allies. I don't see it. So to me, that is something that has to be figured out. And if you're going to, of course, you don't want to go into a conflict, but if you're going to go into a successful competition, you need to have a strategy of prosperity.
In other words, the primary plank of Indian strategy towards China, according to you, should be economic, a search for economic prosperity, policies that promote economic prosperity would be the best way to deal with China rather than something else.
It's one step further than that. Mm-hmm. We have two problems. Well, we have many problems, but centrally, there is an issue with the Chinese rise, but there is a massive issue with job creation in India, with our economic situation in India. We have to resolve that problem. And I'm not one who believes that we can resolve that problem through the services route. I just don't think it's possible. So what does it mean? It means that it is a strategy for the reinvigoration of India. You strengthen India and you will solve both problems.
Through manufacturing, you're saying labor-intensive manufacturing is the way to go, not services.
No. It's not simple black and white. Mm. It is, we have released hundreds of millions of people from our villages. They have come to our cities. We need to give them something to do. We need to give them a vision. We can, however we do it, we got to do it. We got to do it by transforming agriculture. We got to do it by transforming manufacturing. We got to improve our competitiveness in services. But we are facing a catastrophic job problem. And it is related. If India cannot solve its job problem, then India certainly cannot have a global position, certainly cannot take on the challenges that are coming from the Chinese. And that is not to say you don't need a military strategy. Of course you do.
Okay, and my last question in my half hour is about 2019 elections. In December 2018, your party won 3 states. And the narrative in the country was Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh was a huge victory. And the narrative by January of 2019 was that Congress party was going to be a serious contender for power. It may not get 273 seats, but it will certainly increase its share of seats very substantially and pose a challenge to the existing ruling party. By May 2019, 5 months later, 4 to 5 months later, when the results came, your party went up by only a few seats, whereas BJP enhanced its majority, enhanced its vote by 7%, and your vote was 19.5, 19.6. So BJP's vote was twice as large as your vote in 2019 May. What changed between December 18 and May 2019 transforming the political landscape, electoral landscape so much that you were unable to gain much from your victories in December 2018 at the state level?
There are our Chhattisgarh party, and I agree with them on Chhattisgarh for sure, simply cannot explain how we go from a solid two-third victory to 2 seats. They just cannot explain it, right? And I find it very hard to believe that something like that happened. Similar in Rajasthan, right? We had a solid fight, and suddenly we go to 0 seats. Now, it's surprising to me. It's not easy to believe. Now, there are a couple of arguments that people make, and I can see some aspects of those arguments, right? Massive polarization across North India, I can see it, but it doesn't take me to 2 seats in Chhattisgarh. Massive polarization combined with total media dominance, financial dominance, Facebook, WhatsApp, social media dominance, yeah, could be. But those are some of the reasons. You see, again, if you look at the amount of money the BJP is throwing at elections, compare them to what we are doing or what other political parties are doing, and no comparison. It's a ratio of 1:10, right? More. You look at the media, the Prime Minister is 24/7 in the media. Nobody else is there. No other leaders on the television, right? So there's total domination of that stuff. And then in addition to that, you also have domination of institutions. So to me, it is massive concentration of political and financial power that is sitting behind this machine.
And that explains the 2019.
I mean,
to a substantial extent, you argue.
I still don't understand the Chhattisgarh going from a sweep, with a solid set of candidates to 2 seats. I still can't explain it, but the explanations that are given to me, I'm like, okay, maybe.
Okay. Thank you, Rahul. My half hour is up. So let's bring the faculty panel in. The first colleague of mine who's going to ask you a question is Andrew Foster. He is the George and Nancy Parker Professor of Economics. And Andrew, you are on screen.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. So I wanted to sort of recognize you've called for the repeal of the farm laws, but also note that there's sort of considered view that rural poverty in India will remain a major issue as long as there's so many small and marginal farmers, and as long as the supply chains operate, they do. So I'm wondering if you can give us an alternative vision, both of sort of how transformation is likely to happen or should happen over the 5 and 10 years, and what kinds of policies will help make that happen.
Yeah. So what we are against, first of all, we agree that a reform of the agricultural system is required. We also feel that any reform of the agricultural system has to come out of a conversation with the stakeholders of that system. Who are the stakeholders of that system? Farmers, producers, people who manage that system, etc. Our first problem with the farm laws is that there is no conversation that has taken place with the stakeholders. They're not even explained what is happening. The second thing is, to me, the thing you have to look at is the producer. And you have to empower the producer and make him efficient, make his negotiation more effective, etc., etc. Here, there's a full-scale assault on the producer. So literally now the producer is going to be negotiating with Mr. Adani and Mr. Ambani with nobody in between, right? I mean, the 3 laws. The first law basically says no farmers markets. The second law says as much hoarding as you want. And the third law says you can't go and contest it in court. So it is clearly an assault on the farm structure. So we don't agree with that, and we think that it is going to be extremely destructive. In fact, I feel that the BJP simply will not have the power to push these things through. And if they do forcibly do it, we are going to head into some serious social turbulence, right? Indian agriculture, as you saw in the corona, is sort of a shock absorber for a lot of these people. It acts as a place for them to gain respite. So that role is critical in Indian agriculture, right? So how do you think about it? Yes, you think about supply chains. Yes, you think about storage. Yes, you think about cold storage systems. But you think about it by empowering the producer, by involving the producer in the conversation, and that can be done. It's not a complicated thing, right? I think you will need to also transform our agricultural system from a jobs perspective. So you will also have to bring in technology, bring in those nodes into that system so that you can give, I think agriculture can give millions and millions of jobs to people in India if it's done properly. So we're not arguing for no reform of the agricultural system. We're arguing for a reform, but a reform that carries the stakeholder and listens to the stakeholder and involves the stakeholder. I mean, there are many successes. The biggest success in India, agricultural success in India, is Amul, right? And that is essentially, that came out of conversation with farmers. Now, I'm not saying you can replicate Amul all across the country, but the spirit of Amul, where you say, okay, we value what you're doing. We understand that you're struggling. Now let's have a conversation about how we can make this thing work. That's how I think about it.
So I mean, I think a particular concern would be the sort of small and marginal landowners, and whether the kinds of sort of technological advances that you mentioned are going to be feasible for many of them to the extent that they involve sort of larger scale. So is there a way to sort of address that problem? And those are the people probably most resistant to change.
There are models in Maharashtra and different ways of doing things that would do that. But the main question to ask is, okay, you carry out this assault on agriculture, and now you have large-scale corporate farming. You have one guy who's controlling the wheat market. I think, he's controlling basically grain in India. He controls all the silos. He controls all the ports. You've decimated the farmers. Okay, now what do? Can they get a job in the agricultural system? No, they can't. Can they get a job in the manufacturing system? No, they can't. What are they going to do? Mm-hmm. So what you're seeing in Punjab right now, if the laws go through, you will see that at a massive scale. It'll come slowly, but when it comes, then the negotiation is not possible. So the negotiation is, you have to see, if you think about it, India is going through a transformation. It's going through from a rural to an urban transformation. And in a sense, the imagination is changing. So you have to help people through that imagination. You can't just say, sorry, boss, now you have this imagination, I'm going to explode it for you. And, oh, by the way, figure out your imagination on your own.
Fair enough.
Right? It's the same thing they did with GST, right? We are for a GST, but negotiate the thing. Go through the conversation. And once you're ready with the conversation and everything's ready to go, then do it. Right? It's the idea. See, if you ask me, it is massive concentration of capital, 5 or 7 people, massive concentration of political power, which gives the illusion that you don't have to negotiate with anybody. But then when you put the thing into practice, the power of these forces becomes very apparent. And then you're suddenly like, oh my God, what just happened, right? So that's the problem. And I don't think it's simply a Narendra Modi issue. I actually think that the negotiation within the Indian system is struggling. We are having problems with that negotiation that I spoke about. We're technology, communications, we are having difficulty maneuvering. And I think one response to it is Modi and RSS, right? Imagine Europe. India is much better compared to a Europe than to a United States. We have many languages, we have many different types of people. Now imagine if you tried to run Europe forcibly through Belgium. What would happen? Well, Hitler tried to do it, right?
Sure.
Hitler basically said, listen, I can run Europe. I don't need to talk to the French. I don't need to talk to the Italians. I'm going to run Europe. You see what happened to him. Right?
Rahul, are you saying that a better imagination about rural India will be a negotiated imagination?
I'm saying that the only imagination is a negotiated imagination. I'm saying there is no other imagination, right? If you stop the negotiation, if you destroy the architecture of negotiation, you don't have a country. When I go to Tamil Nadu, when I'm going and giving a speech in Tamil Nadu, it's part of the negotiation. I'm going there and they're saying, okay, what is the contract that Tamil Nadu is going to have with the rest of India? Right? It's embedded in the system. If you attack that, you will not realize, but the blowback that will come will be unstoppable. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
I'll give you, Andrew, one more thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at what happened to Pakistan, this is exactly what happened to Pakistan. The negotiation between the ethnicities of Pakistan was dominated by the Punjabis. And the institutional structure that did it was the Pakistani army. Right? And then you had